Chapter 341, The First Eternal to Die. Somewhere in a residential neighborhood in Chicago, police had cordoned off a house with yellow tape. A murder had occurred the night before. After the alarm call, the Chicago police sealed the scene, began their investigation, and collected evidence to identify the suspect and establish what had happened. They classified it as a homicide because the victim was found face down in the yard, and the area around the yard was in disarray, as if a violent struggle had taken place. The interior of the house, by contrast, showed no signs of conflict. Before the forensic team arrived, the officers on site ran a preliminary check, not because they were forensic specialists, but to ensure safety and rule out things like booby traps. When they turned the body over, they were taken aback. The corpse's skin had a dry bluish-gray hue, as if all the color had been drained away. They could not determine race by the discoloration alone, but facial features suggested the deceased was a black man. There were several circular puncture marks on the neck, which the officers suspected might be the fatal wounds, but the exact cause of death would have to wait for forensic analysis. The team also worked to identify the body. The deceased was Fastos, black, gay, and the adoptive father of a young black son. The officers found no trace of Fastos's husband, Ben, or the adopted son, Jack, anywhere around the house. That absence made the police wonder whether they were connected to Fastos's death or had also suffered some misfortune. While they waited for the forensic unit, officers began searching for Ben and Jack, canvassing neighbors and checking nearby surveillance footage for clues. Another oddity compounded the mystery. When they tried to notify family members, they could reach Ben's relatives, but repeated calls to contacts listed under Fastos went unanswered. After several attempts, no one picked up. The police decided to send personnel to inform Fastos's relatives in person. Everything they could do at the scene was done. Now they waited for the forensics team to determine cause of death and hoped the surveillance footage would reveal the killer. The body of the eternal Fastos lay in the yard, his normally dark skin reduced to a dry, bluish gray. What had happened the night before? How had Fastos come to be dead? Timeline, rewind. The night before, Fastos's adopted son Jack had suddenly spiked a high fever. His temperature climbed quickly, his face flushed, and his breathing grew rapid. Panicked, Fastos knew he couldn't delay. They had to get to a hospital. Ben held Jack while Fastos grabbed the keys and rushed them into the car. It was late, the streetlights were dim. Fastos kept his gaze fixed on the road, desperate to reach the nearest emergency room. Although Fastos was an Eternal, he did not have healing powers. Only Ajax among the Eternals could cure illness, so a hospital was the only option. By choice, Fastos had abandoned much of his advanced scientific work. He'd resolved not to use the inventions and technologies he possessed, believing some of the things he left behind for humanity had led to horrors he wanted no part of. Still, he hadn't entirely abandoned all enhancements. His home was reinforced with powerful Eternal tech and nearly impervious to attack, though that wouldn't be obvious at a glance. Driving, Fastos kept an anxious eye on Jack through the rearview mirror while quietly easing the accelerator. As they neared a bridge, an ominous sensation washed over him, a disquiet he had learned to trust. His pulse quickened, and an anxiety sprang up in his chest. He slammed on the brakes. The car lurched and left a long skid mark on the pavement. Ben and the struggling Jack were thrown by the sudden stop. "What's wrong, Phil?" Ben asked, using his pet name for Fastos, anxiety in his voice. Fastos didn't answer. He stared intently ahead, heart pounding. Then he lifted his right hand and slapped it down on the watch strapped to his left wrist. The watch, a seemingly ordinary silver mechanical piece, flared to life under his palm. An orange-yellow glow snaked around his wrist, and a radar-like hologram projected above his hand. A cyan dot represented Fastos. Not far ahead, several large red dots were closing in. "No, this can't be happening. Damn it, why now of all times?" Chapter 342, Fastos Horror Night. "No, this is impossible. Damn it, why now of all times?" Fastos roared, his face tight with fury as he stared at the scanner in his hand. The display showed several large red blips in the river beneath the bridge ahead of their car, moving toward them. "Darling, what's wrong?" his wife Ben asked, voice threaded with unease. "Ben, we have to go back. Now, home. We'll be safe there, Fastos said. The red dots were their worst enemies, deviants. They were heading straight for him, and with his family in the car, he couldn't risk going to the hospital. Home was the only place that might be a sanctuary. Fastos slammed his hand closed, dropped the car into reverse, and stomped the accelerator. He backed up hard, then shifted and spun the car around, driving full throttle toward his house. Behind them came loud splashes. Enormous shapes launched themselves out of the river and hit the pavement. Fastos saw them in his rearview mirror and felt the chill of recognition. They were deviants, the ones everyone thought had been wiped out. He planted his foot harder on the gas. Fortunately for the people of his suburb, hardly anyone was out walking at this hour. Otherwise, he might have struck someone at those speeds. Leading the pack was Crow, the alpha of the deviants who had been active in Alaska. When Crow was in Alaska, the nearest Eternal he'd sensed had been Fastos, but Crow had been cautious. He'd first set out to find other deviants that had broken their seals and bring them under his command before confronting Eternals in the city. Crow had swum downriver into Chicago, using the waterway for concealment. He had changed in the past few days. Where he had once been as large as an African elephant, over 4 meters at the shoulder, he was now about the size of a Bornean pygmy elephant, roughly 2 meters at the shoulder. His body had transformed, smaller overall but denser with packed muscle. He'd traded size for speed and concealment, an evolution born of the need to avoid easy detection. His followers matched his new dimensions. Unlike the wolf-like deviants Crow had once commanded, these subordinates were reptilian, lizard-like, sleek and fast. Crow watched Fastos' car recede, then gave chase. The deviants were terrifyingly quick. Crow bounded on all fours, each heavy step thudding against the road, but it was his smaller, lizard-like subordinates that closed the distance fastest, moving with long-legged, almost galloping strides. Crow ordered them onward while he attempted to flank the vehicle. Cold sweat beaded on Fastos' forehead. The car was at its limit, but his house was not far. One of the lizard deviants, its 4 long legs tearing at the pavement and a massive balancing tail thrashing behind it, almost reached the rear of the car. It launched itself, aiming to crash down on them. "Brake!" Fastos barked. He tapped the brakes, yanked the wheel, and the car swerved just in time. If the deviant had landed on the roof, it might have caved in. His wife and their adopted son Jack could have been crushed. Ben finally understood why Fastos had been so tense. Ahead, a strange creature had leapt and rolled across the street. A hideous thing she'd never seen before, something that shouldn't exist on Earth. Fastos accelerated again, just a few hundred meters, and they would be at the house. "Brake!" came another shout. Fastos swung the car into the driveway in front of the garage. There was no time to pull the car into the garage. They had to stop and move. "Ben, take Jack and go inside, now," he ordered, pressing a button on his wrist. Ben's mouth opened in a small, startled gasp. She saw the resolve in Fastos' face and did not argue. She scooped up Jack and bolted out of the car toward the house. The halo on Fastos' wrist pulsed to life. He thrust his hand forward and fired 2 beams of cosmic energy at the deviant lunging for Ben and Jack. The lizard deviant was hit in midair. The light bullets detonated against its skin, punching 2 bloody holes through its hide. It slammed into Fastos' yard, trampling the things on it and collapsing in a broken heap. Oddly, despite the obvious pain, the creature kept its mouth clamped shut and uttered no roar. Crow had issued a strict order: make as little noise as possible. Any deviant that disobeyed risked severe punishment, so even when wounded, they bit down on their screams. Fastos had no time to worry about that. He fired light blasts at the other pouncing deviants as he backed toward the house. He had to get himself and his family inside. As he fired and retreated, a different figure, not one of the lizard-type deviants, launched itself at him. Fastos adjusted the output of his cosmic energy, steadied his aim, and raised his hand. He unleashed several more powerful light bullets at the incoming attacker. A massive shadow, like a dark cloud, slammed toward Fastos. He could feel that this deviant's aura was far fiercer than the ones before. Without hesitation, he raised the cosmic energy in his body. The emitter on his wrist flared with brilliant light. 2 fist-sized bolts shot out, piercing the night and streaking straight for the figure ahead. The projectiles flew fast, and as they neared, they illuminated the deviant like a searchlight. For the first time, Fastos could make out its shape. It wasn't the lizard-like aberrant he had fought earlier. It was more humanoid. No, more like a huge gorilla. Its forelimbs were enormous, far thicker than its hind legs, the blue muscles on its arms bulging with raw power. Fastos's chest tightened. After years of fighting deviants, he could tell types at a glance, and this one was no ordinary foe. It was Crow. Seeing the bolts coming, Crow opened his palm in midair and swatted them. The two shots burst into orange-yellow fire. The blow sent Crow reeling. He tumbled out of the air and hit the ground. Fastos kept firing and tried to retreat toward his doorway. "Phil!" came a terrified cry from behind. Fastos spun around and froze. An aberrant race lizard had somehow climbed onto the roof and was dangling over the doorway, its lower body hooked at the roofline, while its upper torso loomed before the entrance, blocking Ben and Jack's path. Its scarlet eyes gleamed, fangs bared. It roared at the two humans. Ben clutched Jack and took a few trembling steps back, pale with fear. Fastos's heart lurched. He wanted to turn and protect his family, but more deviants were closing in before him. If he didn't stop them, he couldn't even survive, let alone save Ben and Jack. Desperate, he seized control of a nearby straight-line vehicle and sent it smashing down the alley toward the lizard at the door to draw its attention. Then he refocused on the front, pumping his cosmic energy to fire more light projectiles. The vehicle slammed into the aberrant's face. It didn't do major damage, but it enraged the creature. The lizard roared and prepared to leap at Fastos until Crow growled low behind it. At Crow's command, the roof creature stopped and instead sank its claws into Ben and Jack, pinning them to the ground. Ben and the unconscious Jack were powerless. All they could do was stare up in terror. Crow, who had been knocked down from his earlier fall, watched Fastos and the humans intently. Fragments of human memories he had absorbed flickered through his mind, and two words surfaced: family, lover. The realization narrowed his focus. These two ordinary humans seemed extremely important to the Eternal before him. He seized on that bond as a weapon. "No, Ben, Jack!" Fastos roared. He ignored the attackers in front of him and fired at the lizard that held his family. The projectile exploded against it, blasting the creature back into the wall. A yellow light barrier flared where it struck. The house's structure had been reinforced with Eternal technology. If they could get inside, they would be safe. But the lizard still clutched Ben and Jack in its front claws. The blast only made it grimace and squeeze harder. Both men cried out from the pressure. Before Fastos could react, a giant paw slammed into him. The force hurled him through the air. He flipped several times and crashed harshly to the ground. Pain flared through his body, but the need to protect his family drove him up again. When he looked up, more aberrant race lizards were advancing. "Eternal, cease your resistance, or they will die," a low, hoarse voice warned. Fastos's blood ran cold. The aberrants to either side of the doorway split apart, and the gorilla-like deviant strode through the middle. The voice had come from it. How was that possible? Fastos stared at Crow in astonishment. Deviants did not speak like this. As he gaped, he failed to notice a tentacle sliding from Crow's shoulder, crawling along the shadows on the ground straight toward him. Chapter 344, Big Sip. Fastos stared in shock at the deviants in front of him. The low voice he'd heard earlier had come from them. That they could speak stunned him. If this had happened centuries ago, he would have ordered his fellow Eternals to tie the deviant back to the ship and dissect it, analyzing every detail. But things were different now. His family was in danger, and he was trapped. "Give up resisting, or they die," Crow snarled, his mouth curling as he spoke. He didn't move closer, but a snake-like shadow slithered between them, inching toward Fastos without the Eternal noticing. Fastos glanced at Ben and Jack. They were pinned close to the house wall, close enough that, if he could reach the home control system, he might activate its defenses and kill the deviants holding them. When he designed this house, he hadn't only planned for comfort. There were built-in defensive measures. Until now, though, the deviants' fierce attacks and the threat to his family had kept him from accessing them. He'd been fighting to protect his loved ones and had no chance to tap into the system. Now, the deviants suddenly paused, as if restrained by some force. Seizing the moment, Fastos pretended to struggle and reached for the cosmic energy at his wrist, preparing to interface with the house controls. He knew that if he connected, the home's defenses would turn on and could drive the deviants off. At that critical moment, a black shadow lunged out of the lawn. Fastos barely had time to react before it struck. "Ah!" he screamed as the shadow drove into his shoulder. Severe pain exploded through him. He nearly collapsed. Looking down, he saw the shadow was a tentacle. It extended from one of the nearby deviants. Fastos was furious and terrified, so close to the controls, and now thwarted. He clenched his teeth and tried to pull the tentacle free, but it seemed fused to him. Crow, watching, manipulated the appendage and hoisted Fastos into the air. More tentacles snaked from Crow's body, plunging into Fastos again and again. Fastos opened his mouth to scream, but a tentacle clamped it shut. "Quiet," Crow grunted, a grin twisting his face. His 4 orange eyes fixed on Fastos. The tentacles embedded themselves like greedy straws and began sucking the cosmic energy from Fastos. A faint yellow glow ran along them as streams of energy flowed out of Fastos and into Crow. Fastos felt his strength draining, a tidal weakness sweeping through him. He fought for a moment, then went limp as the light of life ebbed from his face. His skin took on a withered, bluish-green pallor. His struggles ceased. Crow lowered him and stood for a long moment with his head tilted back, savoring the newly acquired energy. Already the deviant's body was changing. The gorilla-like bulk shrank. His form began to align toward a human, or closer still to an Eternal's shape. The rough, scaly hide smoothed into softer skin, and his features sharpened, taking on a warped hint of humanity. Though he had not fully assimilated the energy, Crow's mind surged with a new clarity. Flashes of thought, memories like loose threads weaving themselves together. From Fastos's memories came fragments, images and truths the Eternal had long known. He learned, in splintered pieces, that deviants and Eternals had been created by the Celestials, that the deviants were not mindless animals but a race that had been hunted by the Eternals for millions of years. Rage flared in Crow as his instinctive hatred for the Eternals found a reason. But with the wisdom beginning to stabilize, he calmed. He needed a safe place to metabolize the cosmic energy and complete his evolution. He couldn't remain here. His gaze flicked to the 2 humans who'd been close to Fastos. "Kill them," Crow ordered coldly. An excited, lizard-like deviant obeyed. It picked up Ben and Jack and opened its massive maw. Ben's scream ended as he was swallowed alive, and unconscious Jack was taken with him. Crow then led his subordinates away from the neighborhood to search for some secluded place to evolve. The noise had already roused Fastos's neighbors, who came out to see what was wrong. The police were called. By the time the officers arrived, it was clear that Fastos's life had ended here. The focus shifted to the next day. The police stood by, waiting for the forensic team, while not far from the street, Ajak, leader of the Eternals, strode toward Fastos's house, accompanied by 6 other Eternals and a human, Kingo's assistant. Chapter 345, The Eternals' Spaceship. The town in Chicago, the Eternal Fastos had been attacked by a deviant the previous night. His cosmic energy was drained, and he died in his own yard. The deviant had even killed 2 members of his family. A neighbor, awakened by noises outside, had stepped out to investigate and discovered Fastos's body. The Chicago police had cordoned off the area with yellow tape. Locals gathered beyond the barrier, murmuring and staring at the scene. Not far down the street, Ajak, the leader of the Eternals, walked toward the house accompanied by 5 other Eternals and 1 human, Kingo's assistant. Ajak had recently gone to India to bring Kingo back. Kingo, who had become a Bollywood superstar, had flown with them on his private jet to London to pick up Cersei and Sprite, who had recently settled there. Cersei and Sprite were surprised and happy to see the team again after so long. Once they joined Ajak and the others, the whole group left London and headed for Iraq. Iraq, in the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, had been one of humanity's earliest centers of civilization, the old land of Babylon, where the Eternals had first arrived on Earth. Their ship, the Domo, was still parked beneath those plains. Retrieving the ship was one purpose of Ajak's journey. Another was to find an Eternal who had been living there. When the team stepped off Kingo's jet, they made for the Babylonian ruins. The ancient city, unearthed by archaeologists in the late 19th century, had long since been reduced to ruins, but its scale and the impressions of its former glory were unmistakable. Looking out over the exposed foundations and broken walls, the Eternals felt a flood of memories. This was the place they had guarded and guided humanity. And now, the people and the city belonged to history. Archaeological dig teams worked among the ruins, so Ajax asked Sprite to hide them. Sprite's power was illusion. Making the group invisible to human eyes was nothing for her. They moved into the desert, where traces of old structures showed the passage of past excavations. Ajax stopped and placed her hand over her chest. A yellow orb of light appeared in her palm, the symbol of the Eternal Leader. With Phastos gone, she had to use that orb to interface with the ship. Ajax fed fine threads of cosmic energy from her other hand into the orb, reaching out to the domo buried beneath the sand. The ground trembled, then cracked. The earth split open in several places, and the area collapsed, forming a vast pit. Sand cascaded inward. The Eternals watched without outward emotion, though their eyes were full of history. Karen, the human assistant, was nearly knocked off her feet, but she held on to her camera. From that sinkhole came the domo. Bronze brown and colossal, its triangular form pushed through the earth, casting aside the falling sand. No visible doors or windows interrupted its smooth surface, which was inscribed with golden eternal motifs. As the ship emerged, the commotion attracted the nearby archaeologists, but Sprite's illusion worked again. To the diggers, all they saw was an empty blue sky. Ajax manipulated the orb a final time. An invisible tractor beam extended from the domo and swept the group inside. In moments, they were aboard. Kingo, flanked by Karen, led them through the ship toward the main control room. Something about the interior surprised them. Snack wrappers and litter scattered across the floor. Had someone been living on the ship? They found their answer in the control room. Books and sundries were stacked everywhere. At the center, an old-fashioned chair sat amid the clutter, and in it reclined a black woman with a single ponytail. Makari, the Eternal speedster, closed the book in her hand, smiled and signed toward them. "Are we going home?" Makari was deaf and mute. She spoke in sign language. Ajax, who had traveled with these companions for millions of years, signed back with both hands. "No, Makari. We still have some things to do." Makari's expression turned to despair. She had been on Earth for so long that she ached for her supposed home, Olympia. But Olympia did not exist. It was a memory the Celestials had implanted in them. That was the truth Ajax planned to reveal next. Chapter 346. The Eternals Who Learned the Truth. Ajax signed to Makari, "Clean this place up." She was about to use the domo, but the control room was such a mess she could hardly keep her balance, let alone operate the console. Makari shrugged, and in the next instant, she was gone from the chair, just a blur. Piles of books and trash in the control room disappeared in a flash. Makari's speed was so great that only someone as perceptive as Tina could make out faint motion. Everyone else simply saw things vanish into thin air. Karen, mortal and wide-eyed, gripped his camera and filmed every sudden disappearance. In a short time, the control room was spotless. Ajax looked around, satisfied. Makari stood to the side as if tidying up had been child's play. "This is Makari, the fastest of the Eternals, as you just saw," Kingo announced into the camera held by his assistant, Karen. Ajax then let everyone move freely for a while and went to the control panel to run a systems check. Streams of diagnostic data flashed across the screens, showing the ship's status. As she reviewed the readouts, her thoughts drifted elsewhere. Including herself, 7 Eternals were gathered on the domo. Icarus had betrayed them and was gone. Phastos and Druig were not with them. One was in Chicago, the other believed to be somewhere in the Amazon. Ajax had decided it was time to tell the others about their mission and the truth about what they were. The Eternals had all shed their human clothing and taken on their battle armor again, the suits they hadn't worn in a long time. "Ah, still comfortable," Kingo said as he returned to the control hall with Karen filming behind him. One by one, the others filtered back in. Ajax turned to face them with a serious expression. "I warned you there was a crisis coming for Earth," she said. The group gathered close, bracing for what she would say next. Ajax explained what was going to happen and the real purpose they'd been serving. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. They were not ancient, independent guardians. They had been created by the Celestials. Their memories were implanted and over millions of years repeatedly erased. After each reset, they were dispatched to life-bearing planets to prepare those worlds for a celestial emergence, helping the Celestials consume the planet's life. They had been instruments in a process that ended in mass death. So we're actually just a bunch of manufactured, glorified machines? Kingo muttered, looking stunned. Our memories have been reset and stored off somewhere in space? The room turned silent. The Eternals had trouble accepting it. Makari signed in disbelief. The Olympus I longed to return to. It's fake? Tina stared, remembering the terror she had once felt. What happened to me, Maud Wary? That must have been residue from our last mission, she said. Sprite, who had also pieced things together, nodded. It must have been an error when Arishem wiped our memories last time. Something remained in Tina's mind, and that's what caused the Maud Weary. Gilgamesh looked crushed. I've always thought we were heroes, he said. I never imagined we were the ones sending worlds to their deaths. Kingo shook his head, defensive and increasingly agitated. We're not villains, he protested. We help the Celestials expand life across the universe. That's not evil. It's for the greater good. Cersei countered quietly. Every time innocent lives are sacrificed in the name of some greater purpose, it's wrong. Humans are not tools. Their lives deserve respect. Karen, standing beside Kingo, nodded fiercely. He was one of those humans, the ones the Eternals had been sent to decide the fates of, and he agreed wholeheartedly. Kingo glanced at Karen. Karen offered an awkward, guilty smile. I'm human, he said simply. That's all I can think. Cersei turned to Ajak. What are you going to do? Ajak met them all with steady eyes. For years I obeyed the Celestials and made mistakes, but Earth and humanity should not be sacrificed. We will prevent the emergence. Kingo frowned. We don't have the right to do that, and even if we try, what about Arishem's wrath? The judge won't ignore defiance. As long as we stand together, we'll find a way, Ajak replied. And Arishem isn't the only power on Earth. There is something here, something that can stand against a Celestial. Her words stunned them. Gilgamesh and Tina thought of the human Ajak had once shown them, Noah, and wondered if that was what she meant. Ajak didn't explain everything. Some things she kept to herself for now. After the weight of the revelation settled, they prepared the Domo and activated its stealth systems. The ship slipped through the sky toward Chicago. When they arrived at the coordinates, they found Phastos lying on the ground, already lifeless. Chapter 347, Take Away the Body. No, Phastos? When the Eternals arrived at Phastos' home, they found the house cordoned off with police tape. Ajak felt a cold unease before she could even see clearly inside the barrier. She led the others closer and then stopped. There on the pavement lay the body of one of their own. It was Phastos. The group froze, faces going pale with shock and grief. Who did this? Gilgamesh roared, fury flashing across his features. He lunged for the tape, intent on ripping it aside and rushing to Phastos' side. Passers-by at the edge of the scene took a few nervous steps back. They assumed the burly man was a friend of the deceased, but his aggressive movement toward the cordon made them wary of getting involved. A couple of officers kept their hands near their tasers. The Eternals had recovered their ship, the Domo, from Iraq and flown it back to Chicago. After landing, they had changed into their battle armor, the suits that amplified their strength and granted near-impervious defense, but they had the armor mimic human clothing so they could move through the city unnoticed. If Gilgamesh had charged past the tape in full armor, it would have drawn far more attention. Ajak reached him and put a hand on his arm. Gilgamesh, stop, she said quietly. Tina, standing nearby, gripped his other arm. With both of them holding him back, Gilgamesh finally relented. The officers watching the Eternals relaxed a fraction and took their hands off their tasers. They had no idea that not even a firearm would pierce Gilgamesh's skin. Ajak squeezed his shoulder. Don't be reckless. We can't interfere with human society. Kingo stared down at Phastos for a long, stunned moment. So what now? Are we supposed to leave him here? No, Ajak said. Sprite, use your power. We must take Phastos' body. If Phastos were left where he lay, human forensic teams would examine him. Their internal biology was different from humans, and if scientists discovered that, it would lead to questions and danger. Ajax would not allow their companion to be exposed or desecrated on a human autopsy table. Sprite nodded. She raised her hand and let a filament of cosmic energy curl from her palm. Her illusion work is subtle and precise. She wove a field over the body and the immediate area, then caught Ajax's eye and nodded. "Ready," she signaled without speaking. "Gilgamesh, bring him," Ajax told him. "All right." Gilgamesh stepped forward again and pulled back the tape. This time, the onlookers saw nothing unusual. Sprite's illusion hid what they were doing. To human eyes, the Eternals simply stood where they were. Even when Gilgamesh lifted Phastos, the body appeared to remain undisturbed on the ground. In truth, Gilgamesh saw the truth. Phastos' skin had gone a bluish-black, mottled and dry like dead bark, and the hum of cosmic energy he always felt in their companion was gone, completely drained. Gilgamesh carried Phastos back to the domo. The group's faces were grim and sorrowful. Even Karen, a human and not an Eternal, looked shaken. He had never expected that someone like Phastos, who had seemed immortal, could die. Ajax glanced once more at Phastos' motionless form. "Let's go. Take him home." They walked with heavy feet to the domo. After the revelation that their memories of Olympus had been fabricated, the ship was the only place that really felt like home anymore. Sprite's illusion remained in place until they had put some distance between themselves and the scene. To any onlookers, they had simply left like ordinary people, with nothing in their hands. Sprite's illusions were not tricks of the mind. They were patterns of cosmic energy that bent perception, real to living eyes, and not decipherable by ordinary surveillance cameras. A short time later, the forensic team the police had called arrived. They were not there to perform an autopsy on the street. They wanted to take the body back to the morgue. 2 technicians carried a stretcher up to where Phastos had been. As soon as their hands touched the blanket covering the corpse, the blanket, and what was beneath it, seemed to evaporate. One technician dropped the stretcher and screamed. Officers and investigators who were still checking the house and nearby yards heard the cry and rushed back to the sidewalk. Where the body had been, there was nothing. A circle of bewildered witnesses, passers-by who hadn't yet left, watched, stunned. Some of them pulled out phones, fingers already recording and mouths buzzing with nervous excitement. The scene was bizarre enough to send a dozen speculative videos onto social media within minutes. The police stood silent for a heartbeat, then shouted questions. People argued and murmured. Cameras panned over an empty stretch of pavement and a dropped stretcher, and the rumor spread. The corpse had vanished. News that a body had vanished from a crime scene spread online like wildfire, drawing the attention and hot debate of countless netizens. In an era when anything connected to superpowers was scrutinized, the strangest incidents drew the most curiosity. When related posts were blocked and scrubbed by the platforms, it only confirmed people's suspicions and ramped up the speculation. Theories multiplied across feeds and forums. The investigation at Phastos' house, originally led by the Chicago police, also shifted. With the body gone from the scene, men in black suits moved in, clearly S.H.I.E.L.D. personnel. Supernatural events seemed inevitably to draw S.H.I.E.L.D.'s involvement, and whatever secrets Phastos had been hiding would now be pried open. Ajax, however, had more immediate concerns and did not dwell on agency politics. After she finished addressing the pressing matters at hand, she could consider whether Phastos' technology posed a threat to humanity. They brought Phastos' body back to the domo. Gilgamesh placed him inside the domo's body detection cabin, hoping to determine the cause of death and identify the killer from the diagnostics. The Eternals gathered, silently watching the readouts on the screen as the cabin ran its scans. "Phastos' cosmic energy is gone," someone murmured, reading the display. Who would do something like that? Ajax stared at the screen, deep in thought. At first, she had suspected Icarus. After their conflict, he might have acted preemptively to prevent people from turning against him, striking them down one by one. But when she tried to sense Icarus' location, she found he was not on Earth. He was still recovering from his injuries in outer space. That possibility fell away, and another image rose in her mind, the deviants Icarus had shown her. Had the deviants attacked Phastos? Ajax shared her hypothesis. Most of the others rejected the idea that Icarus would be the killer, None of them truly believed he would do such a thing, but the idea that the deviants were responsible found support from Gilgamesh and a few others. On Earth, the greatest source of hatred and conflict toward the Eternals would likely come from the deviants. Deviants? Weren't they all dead? Makari signed and voiced, puzzled. Really? Have they come back? Kingo asked, frowning. Only Gilgamesh, Tina, and Ajak had directly encountered deviant attacks so far. Phastos had been killed by one. The others had no idea the deviants had resurfaced. The revived deviants might be avoiding densely populated human cities, which would explain the limited contact, though Phastos lived in a city too, and the one who took his life was Crow, the most cunning of the deviants, who could strike even there. Because Ajak, Gilgamesh, and Tina had been traveling in a hurry, they hadn't had time to warn the rest about the earlier attacks. Yes, Gilgamesh said. The deviants have reappeared. They attacked Tina and me before. They even managed to find us out in the Australian desert. They seemed to be able to locate us. After the deviants revived in that stretch of Australia, they had pinpointed the two of them in the middle of an enormous desert, a sign that these deviants might possess a way to track eternal signatures. If that's true, it makes them likely suspects, Cersei said, glancing at the empty readout for Phastos' cosmic energy. But why would they take his cosmic energy? They all considered that. None had ever encountered a case where cosmic energy was extracted from a fallen Eternal. Maybe they can use it, Sprite offered. You said before the deviants, like us, were made by the Celestials. If we're both creations of the Celestials, perhaps the deviants can draw on cosmic energy too. Sprite had a knack for cutting to the heart of a matter. She had done so before, after Ajak revealed the truth about Mod Wyrie, and now she'd landed on a plausible motive for why the deviants would take Phastos' energy. If deviants could harness cosmic energy, their return would be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. So what do we do? Kingo asked Ajak. Should they strike back at the deviants now, or continue preparing to confront the Celestials? First, we arrange a funeral for Phastos in accordance with human customs, Ajak said after a moment. He reached out to me once and said he'd started a family with a human. She let the sentence hang. The others knew the rest. Word from outside the cordon had said that besides the dead man, 2 others remained missing. Phastos and his family were among the victims. We won't let this go unanswered, Ajak added, but there are more urgent things we must handle right now. On a seaside estate up the New York coast, Noah received a message from Lysandra around the same time. She had intercepted a photo circulating online of the vanished body incident. The image clearly showed the Eternals. These were people Noah had been watching closely, so Lysandra forwarded the photo to him as soon as she had it. Chapter 349, Good Death. Smile. Is this a team-building event for the Eternals? Noah muttered when he saw the photo Lysandra had sent. He was joking, of course. These Eternals were probably the companions reassembled after he'd sent Ajak to Gilgamesh. He counted the people standing beside Ajak in the picture. 1, 2, 3, 7. That should be almost all of them, he thought. He picked out Gilgamesh and Tina, 2 Eternals he'd met in Australia, and Cersei and Sprite, who had traveled from New York to London. There was an Indian man and a black woman, likely the celebrity Eternal and the speedster. The chubby Indian man who served as Kingo's assistant was familiar enough that Noah recognized him but didn't pay him much attention. Have they returned to the U.S.? What happened? Noah asked. Yes, Lysandra replied. A projection screen rose in front of him, showing screenshots and posts pulled from forums and social media. The photos were taken by onlookers outside the police cordon at the Phastos crime scene. You could clearly see the body in some of them. There were also threads about the mysterious disappearance of the corpse. Most of those posts had been taken down by moderators, but that didn't stop Lysandra. Noah studied the pictures and the accompanying data Lysandra placed beside them: the victim's name, race, black, sexual orientation, his husband, and their adopted son. From that, he put the pieces together. Oh, I remember now. This is the only black man among the Eternals, Noah said. He recalled the scientist in the film, openly gay with that kissing scene that had made Noah uneasy. If there was an Eternal Noah liked the least, it was probably him. After the Fat Man explosion, The man had gone to Hiroshima to kneel and weep, declaring that if he hadn't shared his technology with humans, the tragedy wouldn't have happened. Noah had found the attitude absurd. Mourning the victims of the bombing was one thing. Questioning why the place had been targeted in the first place was another. Who had started the war? Who had been the aggressor? Playing the victim and trying to whitewash responsibility didn't sit right with him. Even if the movie had shaped that portrayal, Noah expected the Eternal in this world would think similarly. So when he realized this man had died, there was a little cold amusement in him. Well, cough, he murmured. One fewer Eternal. It shouldn't change the main events. In the film, Phastos had devised the method of pooling everyone's cosmic energy and using the orb inside Ajak's body to implement it. But Ajak hadn't died this time, and even without Phastos, the plan should still be workable. Still, the gathering looked nearly complete. If that was true, Noah needed to prepare. After switching off the screen, he started to think through the timeline. According to the usual sequence, Ajak would soon locate the last Eternal, the one who could bend minds, a druid-like figure whose power resembled Noah's own Mind Stone ability, but was weaker. That Eternal couldn't control the other Eternals or the Deviants. Perhaps his power was coded not to affect his own kind, and Deviants had been treated as kin. Once everyone convened, Ajak would reach out, and they'd work to stop Emergence Day together. Noah opened his mission panel and checked the celestial mission. There had always been a countdown next to it. Emergence Day, when the newborn celestial would erupt from the Earth's core. That countdown was the mission timer. If it hit 0, the celestial would draw life from the planet and then detonate it, and the mission would be a total failure. The timer had already fallen from the year Noah first saw down to just over 170 days, roughly half a year. The reason was his resolve rune. Its massive life force interfered with the celestial egg's sensors, making the egg think intelligent life had already reached the conditions necessary for birth. In effect, the rune's life force could substitute for human intelligence as a trigger. Half a year left, Noah mused. Should I let it run a while longer, or finish this now? Dealing with an unborn celestial wasn't especially difficult. He could follow the movie's pattern, wait until the celestial was nearly out, have the Eternals combine, and have Cersei petrify the newborn. The real complication was what happened afterward. Once the Eternals neutralized the newborn in the film, Aurelion, the celestial judge, came calling. Completing this mission would almost certainly invite the arrival of the Celestials themselves. So besides planning the immediate mission, Noah needed to think about the aftermath. How would they find the celestial seed in the core? How would they handle whatever came next? For now, he decided to wait. I'll wait until Ajak contacts us, he told himself. If we're going to act preemptively against the Celestials, we need a plan for locating the seed and dealing with the consequences. There's a lot to consider. Chapter 350, A Paradise in the Amazon Rainforest. Inside the domo, everyone was still coming to terms with Phastos' death. The burial ceremony had not yet been held. Ajak wanted to bring the last Eternal back to the team before they gave Phastos his final farewell. Outside Chicago, the domo that had been parked in the wilderness slowly rose under Ak's control and vanished from its original spot. Soon it reappeared over the Amazon rainforest in South America, the world's largest jungle, with an almost impenetrable canopy. Even Ajak had to search for a while before finding a treeless swamp where the domo could land. "Let's go," Ajak said, and they stepped out. "Oh, what is this place?" As soon as they emerged, everyone found themselves standing in a wet, mucky swamp. Black water stretched around them, and the ground beneath their feet was thick, sticky sludge. The damp, revolting stench made all the Eternals wince. "This is the closest open space to Druig, so I chose to land here," Ajak said with a calm smile, watching their reactions. "This place is really unfriendly," Kingo muttered, slapping away a mosquito that had tried to bite his neck. "I actually find it a bit familiar," Gilgamesh said, holding Tina's hand. "Tina and I lived here for a while, long ago. Before Gilgamesh went to Australia, he and Tina had lived in the Amazon. Their relationship with Druig had been good. He'd been the first to object when Ajak suggested erasing Tina's memories. But Tina's Mod Wiry had worsened, and because Druig led a group of ordinary humans in the area, They worried her condition might hurt them. So Gilgamesh and Tina had left, choosing seclusion elsewhere. Coming back stirred nostalgia. A sudden shape burst from the black water, an alligator's jaws aimed straight at them. Gilgamesh reacted instantly, catching the snapping mouth, forcing it open, and flinging the black caiman more than 10 meters away with a great splash. "Oh!" Karen, the only human in the group, cried out in surprise. Seeing the scene, the others couldn't help thinking the wildlife here would be more endangered by their presence than they were by the animals. After the brief commotion, they moved on, but trudging through the swamp was slow and arduous. They couldn't simply fly away like Icaris. The wet terrain held them back. Circe stepped forward. She crouched and set her hands on the dirty surface. Golden eternal sigils spread from her palms across the muck. Gradually, the mud under their feet began to harden and lift. Right before them, the swamp transformed into solid earth, a narrow path wide enough for everyone to walk on. Circe's power altered matter at a molecular level, converting substances into other forms. It was similar, some noted, to Noah's whimsy ability derived from Lulu, but Circe could not transform living beings. In the film, after she obtained Ajax's leadership orb, her power seemed to work on living organisms too, but Ajax was still alive, so that evolution hadn't happened here. Circe didn't change the whole swamp, only created a walkway. "Look, this is Miss Circe's ability. More magical than the most amazing trick," Kingo said to Karen, who was filming. "Incredible," Karen exclaimed. Circe glanced toward the camera and blushed a little. They followed the earthen path out of the muck. Once they reached true solid ground, Circe restored the path to swamp. She didn't want to casually alter the local ecology. That, too, was a form of respect for nature. Even off the swamp, conditions were still rough. The ground was damp, and insects swarmed, mosquitoes, biting flies, venomous things. The Eternals weren't truly threatened. A jack could heal them if needed, but the constant irritation wore on them. Sprite finally couldn't tolerate the clouds of mosquitoes and used her illusion to hide herself from them. When the trick worked, everyone's pace picked up. Soon they reached their destination, a small village tucked into the Amazon. If someone expected a primitive tribe in loincloths, they were surprised. This settlement looked like a peaceful, isolated paradise. Neatly built wooden houses blended into the forest. Villagers were cleanly dressed and working with easy smiles, farming, crafting at benches, children running and playing. They looked much like ordinary people from any modern town, their faces open and content. The villagers watched Ajax and the others with curiosity, but kept their distance for now. "This place looks really nice, sir," Karen said to Kingo, smiling as he filmed. "Don't be fooled. Sometimes ignorance is bliss," Kingo replied, scanning the village. There were things Karen didn't know, and that Kingo knew all too well. Chapter 351, False Utopia and Angry Druids. The village looked impossibly harmonious, a paradise tucked deep in the untamed Amazon, strangely out of place among the wild foliage. The Eternals and the others understood at once what they were seeing. This was the same community Druig had taken when he left after the falling out in Tenochtitlan. Druig had been driven away by his outrage at the Eternals' rules, particularly Ajax's insistence that he refrain from interfering when humans slaughtered one another. He could not accept being forbidden to use his power to stop the killing, so he walked away and took with him the soldiers from 2 warring nations whose minds he had seized. Over centuries, those people migrated until Druig finally put them down deep in the forest, where they were untouched by the outside world. The villagers now, every smiling face they saw, were descendants of those original followers. On the surface, it was a utopia. There were no class divisions, no overt strife, only equality, mutual respect, and a cheerful ease of life. But Kingo, who knew Druig as only a close teammate could, said quietly, "Ignorance is bliss." He understood that the harmony wasn't organic, it was manufactured by Druig's mind control. The villagers were happy, yes, but they had no idea they were no longer acting on their own. Keen to capture everything, Kalen filmed as they entered. He had already recorded many scenes of the Eternals and planned, at Kingo's urging, to edit them into a documentary when they returned. Whether for Kingo's private archive or for the world, Kalen didn't know. They saw no sign of Druig at first. Sprite walked through the narrow streets, scanning the shops and workshops until she approached a man carving wood. "Hey," she said, "we're looking for Druig. Is he here?" The man glanced up without stopping his work. "Druig? Why?" He froze mid-sentence as his pupils flashed gold. "Hello, Sprite. Long time no see," he said in a voice that was not quite his own. Sprite's skin prickled. The change in the man's eyes meant only one thing. Druig had reached across and seized him. Around them, every villager, regardless of age or gender, had stopped what they were doing. Quietly, they drifted closer, forming a ring. Their eyes glowed the same unnatural gold as they stared at the newcomers. Kalen, unused to that kind of unblinking attention, shifted uneasily. "What's going on?" he asked. "Don't worry," Ayak stepped forward, forcing calm into her voice. "Nothing will happen." From the largest house in the village, the heavy wooden door was pushed open. Druig walked out and smiled at them like a host greeting guests. "Long time no see," he said. "I've always believed in you." He stepped forward, arms open. "Make yourselves at home." When he saw Makari in the crowd, he broke into sign language. "Have you missed me?" Makari returned the gesture with a grin. "Of course." Ajak stepped forward, counting her steps. "Druig, there's something very important we have to tell you," she said. They followed him into the house. When the lights came up, it looked less like a home and more like a chapel, rows of benches below and a raised pulpit above. The Eternals sat on the benches. Druig took the platform. "So this is what you've been hiding from me all along, Ajak?" he said from above, hands clasped on his knees, leaning forward. Ajak had just told him everything. She was the last among them to reveal the truth, and his face was a tight mask of restrained fury. "It seems I was right before," Druig continued. "We're no different from those soldiers, pawns, all of us, blinded by loyalty." The words were the same ones he'd once thrown at Ajak during their argument, and now, hearing the full truth, he felt vindicated and sick all at once. "Ajak," one of them began. "Enough!" Druig's voice cut through the room. "I don't want to hear any more from you. For 7 millennia, I've been on a suicide mission. My whole existence is a lie." He rose, storming down from the platform. Ajak's attempts to placate him faltered. She knew there was nothing she could say while his rage burned so hot. "I will not join your ridiculous plan." Druig looked at the gathered Eternals and the villagers, and then he turned and left the chapel. Makari tried to sign a small apology as he passed, a comforting gesture, but Druig only shook his head and walked away into the bright world he had made, angry, disillusioned, and utterly certain he had done the right thing by tearing himself free. After roaring in anger, Druig strode out of the room, leaving the others staring at one another. "He looks really upset," Kingo said. At first he'd been disturbed too, but then he remembered his own robot persona and suddenly found it kind of amusing. Ideas for movies popped into his head, and his irritation faded. "He just needs time," Ajak said, gazing at the closed door. She turned to Makari. "Makari, go check on Druig. He needs someone to talk to." Ajak had lived alongside the other Eternals for a very long time and knew their personalities well. She knew how best to handle their tensions. Makari nodded, and, in a blur of motion, was gone. Druig, standing outside and staring into the distance, didn't flinch when she appeared at his side. Instead, he gave her a small, wry smile. Inside the church, Kingo watched them leave and asked Ajak, "So what do we do now? He doesn't seem like he wants to come with us." "He'll come around," Ajak said. "For now, we'll stay here and rest." "What? How long do we have to stay? My phone doesn't even have a signal," Kingo complained. "Tina, let's go for a walk. We never got to see the place properly before," Gilgamesh said to Tina. Because of Madwari, they had kept to their dwelling when they were here the last time. Now that they were back, Gilgamesh wanted to make up for it. Tina nodded and left the church with him. "Cersei, my phone's got a signal here," Cersei offered, turning to Kingo. "If you need it, you can borrow it." "Oh, thank you, Cersei. Which carrier do you use? You've actually got reception here. I'm definitely switching when we get back." Kingo bubbled, already thinking about it. For the moment, the Eternals stayed in the little village, waiting for Druig to change his mind. Eschild, as expected. Noah hovered above Phastos's house in Chicago and frowned. Lysandra had told him about Phastos's death, and Noah had come not to mourn, but to see what had killed the eternal scientist. When he materialized over the mansion, he found it already ringed by men in black suits. Agents were sweeping the grounds and canvassing the area. Esield was asking who Fastos had been and why his body had vanished. Noah descended toward the roof. Instead of smashing through shingles, he slipped through the material as if he were water, then walked the halls. The agents inside never looked up. They continued their work as if no invisible visitor had entered. Noah had used the space stone to pass through solid matter and the mind stone to bend their perception. Right now to them, he simply didn't exist. He moved through the rooms, taking in the layout until something caught his attention. At a stretch of wall, he paused and reached out. He could feel the stone's power at his fingertips. With a casual pressure, he pushed against the surface as if it were thin board. A faint buzz ran through the air, and a golden sigil flared into view across the wall, stopping his hand. The sudden shimmer drew the agent's eyes, even if they couldn't see him. They shifted toward the glowing pattern and began to move closer, curious. Noah raised a hand. A soft yellow light washed over them, and almost imperceptibly, he rolled a nudge of the Mind Stone through their thoughts, an impression that made them halt and drift back toward their earlier positions as if someone had called them away. Noah turned back to the wall and examined the gold filigree. "Eternal tech," he muttered. He pressed again, concentrating power into his fingertip. Under his push, hairline cracks spidered across the protective layer. When he withdrew his hand, the fractures closed themselves, knitting back together with a faint, automatic repair. The force he'd used had been substantial. He estimated these defenses could shrug off modern aircraft munitions or a tank shell. Fastos had been a formidable engineer. Noah allowed himself a small, cold smile. If Fastos were still alive, the Mind Stone could have made him useful. "Lysandra, scan the house. There's technology here worth taking apart," he said. At his command, a stream of nanomaterials spilled from his belt and coalesced into a small, spherical drone, Lysandra's compact form. The orb blinked, and a scanning beam shot from its lens, painting the rooms as it began to map and analyze the mansion's hidden systems. Chapter 353, Midnight Video. Although Noah didn't care much for Fastos personally, he respected the Eternal's technological skill. The defensive systems Fastos had set up around the house held plenty of useful data Noah could scan and take back for study. While Lysandra swept the house, Noah again used the Mind Stone to make the agents ignore the small flying robot. The agents quickly returned to their previous tasks, as if nothing had happened. As he waited, Noah's eyes drifted to a photograph on a cabinet. He picked it up and studied it. A family portrait of Fastos, his partner, and their adopted son. Noah recognized Fastos at a glance, an adult black man, and the other two were clearly his partner and their child. "Looks like the whole family is gone," he murmured, shaking his head, and set the photo back. The image pulled another question to the surface. What killed them? Noah wondered. He considered possibilities. Icarus flashed through his mind first. Icarus's loyalty to the Celestials was absolute. He had opposed Ajax's betrayal. Noah imagined a scenario in which Icarus, trying to prevent Ajax's team from gaining strength, might have preemptively eliminated those he suspected of joining her. But the idea felt thin. Fastos and Icarus had been allies for thousands of years. Would that relationship sour into slaughter? The thought didn't linger. Icarus didn't seem the type to go that far, not without some deep-rooted grievance. Noah remembered the original movie's arc, where Icarus, overwhelmed with guilt after slaughtering teammates, flew into the sun. Things here had diverged from that script. Maybe Icarus's motives had shifted after his clash with Noah. Beyond Icarus, the most obvious suspects were the Deviants, ancient enemies of the Eternals who had every motive to attack. Or perhaps Fastos had crossed some other villain and paid the price. Before Noah could keep spinning scenarios, Lysandra finished her scan and drifted in front of him. As if answering his thoughts, she projected a surveillance video into his vision. "This is," Noah asked. "Footage from a nearby camera," Lysandra said. "It captured events from last night." Noah watched. The clip showed a quiet residential street at night, in grainy black and white night vision. Based on landmarks, Noah guessed it was from a traffic light camera not far from Fastos' house, normally used for recording vehicle violations. The camera couldn't see the house itself, only the road in front of it. A car entered the frame. Noah recognized it instantly, the same car he'd seen parked in Phastos's yard. It sped along the street as if the driver were in a hurry. After briefly leaving the frame, the car suddenly turned around and came back even faster, clearly accelerating to an extreme. Then Noah understood why. Several lizard-like creatures burst into view, chasing the car. They were followed by a larger, more cumbersome creature, something like a huge gorilla, closing in behind them. "It's the deviants," Noah said under his breath. "I didn't expect them to come this far." Seeing the footage, the answer fell into place. It hadn't been Icarus or some conventional villain who'd killed Phastos. It had been the deviants. Noah had killed a pack of deviants a few days earlier, ones that had looked more like wolves. The deviants, it seemed, took different forms in different regions. These were reptilian, and one of them was a massive, more unusual specimen. That gorilla-like behemoth didn't quite fit the lizard pattern, but the discrepancy only raised another possibility. The remainder of the camera's clip was mundane. The actual fight at Phastos's property didn't show up on that feed, but it didn't need to. Noah had seen enough. Phastos hadn't stood a chance. As a scientist who had not fought in centuries, he would have been ill-equipped to handle a coordinated attack by several deviants. Noah also recalled something else. How, in the movie, a deviant had absorbed Ajak's energy, draining her like a living battery. Lysandra had also pulled up police images of Phastos's corpse. The state in which they found him matched Ajak's death in the film. Putting it all together, Noah's suspicion hardened. The deviant that killed Phastos might be the same kind of entity featured in the movie, one capable of absorbing eternal energy. Chapter 354. Regarding the mission of the abnormal. After Noah dealt with Icarus in Alaska, he had taken the chance to wipe out the local deviants. At the time, he'd found it odd. None of the deviants he killed matched the main villain from the footage he'd seen. The creatures he'd dispatched were wolf-like, not the one he remembered. Phastos's death this time had played out exactly like Ajak and Gilgamesh's deaths in the movie, though, so Noah began to suspect that the deviant shown at the end of the recording was probably the same main villain he'd missed in Alaska. There were differences. The deviant in Noah's memory had seemed larger, but that might not matter. The deviants evolved frequently. It could have changed form since he last saw it. Not every deviant would have the same capabilities either. In the film, the deviant first absorbed Ajak's cosmic energy, gaining healing ability and Ajak's memories, but the true leap in intelligence came after it killed and absorbed Gilgamesh's power. This time, although the creature failed to take Ajak's or Gilgamesh's energies, it unexpectedly absorbed Phastos's, Phastos, the smartest of the Eternals. If that deviant had gained Phastos's energy, could it bypass the limitations of a beast's mind and evolve intelligence directly? A creature with deviant strength, coupled to eternal-level intellect, would be a far more dangerous threat. Noah frowned. Deviants were not to be underestimated. Great physical strength, rapid evolution gifted by the Celestials, and the ability to grow stronger by hunting life. In the movie, a deviant that absorbed cosmic energy could even accelerate the evolution of its subordinates by injecting them with energy. Those upgraded deviants were powerful enough to temporarily hold Icarus at bay when he wasn't in armor. If this deviant now had Phastos's intellect, it would only be more cunning and cautious. Next time they showed up, they might be running planes and guns instead of just prowling the wilderness. He wanted to find them, but had no precise way to locate their movements. Phastos's death had happened some time ago. If it had been recent, Malzahar's precognition might have let him reconstruct traces of the past, but that ability grew unreliable over long stretches. Precognition is inherently better at looking forward than at reconstructing history. Noah considered other avenues. The deviants' ultimate goal was to eliminate their mortal enemies, the Eternals, so they would actively hunt down eternal traces. If he tracked eternal movements, he might be able to locate the deviants by following their prey. And there was a practical motive beyond curiosity. Deviants could easily be a B-rank mission. He wouldn't bother with C-rank threats. Warwick and his team could handle those, but a B-rank job was worth his attention for the reward. On that thought, he summoned his system panel and opened the mission interface. He had one unused mission attempt for the day, so he hit refresh. A new mission popped up at the top of the list. B-rank mission, Deviant Remnants. Background. In ancient times, the Celestials created a unique life form, the Deviants. Because their existence threatened the evolution of intelligent life on Earth, the Eternals bore the responsibility of purging them. After a fierce war, most Deviants were eliminated, but remnants that hid through the ages have recently resurfaced, posing a renewed threat to Earth. Mission objective, Summoner. Track and eliminate these deviant remnants to ensure the safety and stability of Earth. No point in a long preamble, Noah muttered, noticing he still had that mission attempt unused, and tapped accept. Acceptance successful. The mission appeared among his active tasks. It had no time limit. He could complete it whenever he wanted, unless someone else killed the deviants first, in which case the mission would fail. Lysandra, let's go, he told the small spherical robot beside him. On his command, it disintegrated into a cloud of nanobots and flowed back into the compartment at his belt. His first stop would be Ajax's last known location, see if there were any traces of deviant activity, and check how far any hunt had progressed. Noah rose, dematerialized through the roof, and shot up into the sky. Back inside the house, the S-Shield agents continuing their sweep had started to feel increasingly uneasy. One of them knocked over a vase while searching. It shattered into a scatter of ceramic. At the instant it hit the floor, a faint golden barrier flashed into being across the tiles. It winked out almost as quickly as it appeared, but the agent had seen it, and he was sure it hadn't been a trick of the light. Chapter 355. Druid, in the Amazon, the secluded village's people had already had the control lifted when the Druid and the Eternal entered the church. They'd returned to their posts, unaware that they had just been manipulated. That wasn't surprising. An Eternal's power was beyond any human resistance. In ancient times, people had indeed worshipped such beings as gods. The Druid, who was also the village chief, left the church in a fury and walked to a nearby lake, standing quietly at the water's edge. The lake's calm surface betrayed none of the turmoil in his chest. A soft rustle announced someone behind him. He turned to find Makari standing there, having appeared without fanfare. "What are you doing here?" the Druid signed. Makari came up to stand beside him and signed back. "This place calms me. Whenever I'm upset, I come here." He patted the Druid's shoulder and signed, "Don't be discouraged. At least now we know the truth." The Druid shook his head. "No, Makari, I'm not sad. I'm angry at Ajax for keeping things from us." Makari hesitated, then signed earnestly, "Druid, Ajax was wrong to deceive us, but she has shown courage. She stood up to the Celestials and told us the truth. We should give her a chance to make amends." The Druid let the words sit with him. His anger hadn't faded. He remembered, all too clearly, how his memories had been erased and how he had been treated like a puppet for years. Ajax had lied, yes, but she wasn't the architect of their fate. The real architects were the Celestials who had made them. Still, resisting the Celestials felt impossible. He believed and feared that even if all 9 Eternals united, they would be crushed by a single gesture from a Celestial. "Even if I forgive Ajax, what changes?" he signed bitterly. "We cannot match Arishem the Judge. I've protected these humans for 20 generations, kept them safe from outside threats and from their own weaknesses. Maybe humanity is meant to be extinguished." Makari's expression hardened. "Ajax said she has a way to deal with Arishem. That's why there's hope," he signed. When Ajax had revealed the truth on Domo, she'd given everyone time to collect themselves. She knew that, after so many years of deception, whatever came next would be hard to hear. Slowly, most of them calmed, but many still believed that defying the Celestials was a fool's errand. The Celestials were their creators. How could creations overthrow their makers? Kingo was the most despondent. He'd approached Ajax several times, saying he wanted to withdraw from the mission and spend his remaining time in peace. The Celestials' arrival would mean the erasure of their memories, no different, Kingo thought, from death. To steady morale, Ajax called a meeting and laid out why she believed they could stand against the Celestials. At first, the other Eternals were stunned by the idea of allying with humans to fight the Celestials. In their minds, humans were notable mainly for their technology. They didn't seem powerful enough for such a task. Only Gilgamesh and Tina were calm. Both had met Noah before and already had some understanding of the human ally Ajak mentioned. Having seen Noah heal Tina's Maud Wyrie, the two had some faith in him. More crucially, a recent recovery had made the Eternals reluctant to go back to their old cycles. They had just tasted life after illness. The thought of having their memories wiped and returning to endless, dispassionate labor filled them with resistance. They were determined to fight for their freedom and destiny. Most agreed, for now, to join Ajax's resistance. Makari had explained all this to the druid, hoping to win his support. The druid watched the lake, his reflection rippling as he considered. Makari gently tugged his sleeve. "I don't want my memories erased. I don't want to forget my friends. Would you forget me?" Makari signed, his face open and sad. The druid drew a slow breath and looked at him. Makari's eyes were firm with hope. "Makari, all right," the druid signed after a long pause, letting out a resigned sigh. "I'll join. I will fight Orisham the Judge with you all until the end." Makari smiled, relief bright on his face. "I knew you wouldn't give up so easily," he signed. They stayed by the lake and talked into the evening, sharing stories of the years they'd spent apart. "You stayed on Domo for hundreds of years? You should have gone looking for me," Makari signed playfully. "I thought we'd be back soon," the druid signed in return. Who knew it would take so long? Chapter 356, Exposed. Under Makari's persuasion, Druid finally agreed to return to the Eternals. He still nursed a deep, unresolvable grudge against Ajak for her deception and had not forgiven her. His decision to rejoin was driven as much by his peculiar bond with Makari as anything else. In conversation with her, he had also learned that Akaris had betrayed the team. Druid and Akaris had never gotten along. When he heard the news, he only scoffed. Elsewhere in the village, Kingo, with Karin in tow, was pestering Cersei and Sprite while filming his documentary. Gilgamesh and Tina wandered through the settlement, exploring. The Amazon jungle didn't offer the carefully curated vistas some might expect. But for Tina, who had spent centuries in the desert, even the venomous snakes and fierce beasts of the rainforest felt wondrously new. "Look at this little guy, how interesting," Gilgamesh said, holding a creature in his hand. Tina, equally curious, reached out to stroke its head. Any nearby villager would have dropped their jaw at the sight. The little guy was not a squirrel, but a massive Amazonian anaconda, nearly 6 meters long. The beast was a top predator, a monster of muscle and scale, yet it behaved like a placid pet around them. Gilgamesh held its head easily while the body coiled around his arm. The death coil that could crush and suffocate prey felt to him like nothing more than a massage. "So big, so thick. I've never seen a snake like this in the desert," Tina breathed. Gilgamesh led her deeper into the jungle, showing her the exotic charms of the rainforest. Inside the village church, the other Eternals had left, and Ajax sat alone on a bench, lost in thought and planning their next steps. She didn't appear especially worried about Druig. She knew Makari well and trusted her capacity to handle the situation. Makari had led the team for years and was adept at managing the fragile relationships among them. Ajax's mind was already on the future, the direction of the team and the greater challenges that loomed. A sudden, peculiar fluctuation broke her meditation. A golden pattern blossomed on her chest, and a luminous orb, the mark of the Eternal's leader, rose and hovered before her. Ajax's eyes snapped open. She had not summoned it. The orb flared, sending gilded rays that traced patterns through the air. The church's walls seemed to dissolve as the light spread. The sanctuary fell away, and Ajax found herself standing in a pitch-black expanse. The rays braided themselves together, and before her, a colossal figure formed, a god with 6 luminous eyes and a majestic, imposing frame. "Orisham the Judge," Ajax whispered, naming the celestial. As his voice rolled through the void like a tolling bell, Orisham spoke. "From the orb, I sensed unpermitted thoughts rising in your heart." Ajax's pulse quickened. Her thoughts had been perceived through the orb, and she felt a mixture of surprise and dread. She steadied herself and met his gaze. "I don't want to see Earth destroyed like the previous planets," she said. "The lives on this world are innocent." Orisham regarded her in silence. Light gleamed from his 6 eyes, an oppressive presence pressing down on her. "The end of one life is the beginning of another," he intoned. Only by the birth of new celestials can the universe avoid falling into darkness. New life must arise. You understand this, Ajax." As he spoke, he unleashed a pulse of energy aimed at correcting her dissenting thought. Ajax swallowed hard, feeling the vast, incomprehensible power of the celestial, but she lifted her head and answered with resolve. "I have compromised many times," she said, "but not this time. For the lives on Earth, I will not compromise again. I will prevent the emergence." She tried to use the cosmic energy within her to sever the link to Aurelion, but against him her power was a single grain of sand in an endless ocean. Aurelion watched, the light in his eyes shifting, and golden bands of confinement sprang up to bind her, holding her fast. "Interesting," Aurelion said. "For the sake of the lives on this planet, you are willing to sacrifice a celestial, possibly your own life." His voice held a new curiosity. "Then I will judge this world myself and see if its life is worthy of survival." His interest in Ajax's defiance had been piqued, and he chose to judge Earth to determine whether it should be spared or consumed to birth a new celestial. "But your action requires punishment," he added. "I will strip you of your life." At those words, the cosmic energy within Ajax began to drain away. Pain unlike any she had known tore through her, and she screamed as the power was stripped from her body. "I believe Earth does not seem to be yours to judge, God," another voice cut through the void. The blackness in front of Aurelion twisted as if an invisible hand had torn the fabric of space. A hole of utter darkness opened, radiating a terrible force. From that expanding void, a colossal figure slowly emerged. In front of Aurelion the judge, the previously empty cosmic void tore as if rent by an invisible giant hand. A pitch-black hole widened, exuding a terrifying, palpable force. From its center, a figure began to take shape, radiating an oppressive aura. "Hello there, God." The voice was deep and carried a careless amusement, as if the speaker scarcely regarded Aurelion the judge of the Celestials. At the same moment the figure appeared, the restraining halos on Ajax vanished without her noticing. She turned to the newcomer at once. The instant she looked, an overwhelming pressure sank into her chest, as if an unseen mountain pressed down and stole her breath. The aura was cold and dark, demonic from some abyss, and it made her shiver. The purplish-black form coalesced in the warped space. Vast and imposing, it rose like an ancient deity dragged up from the deep. Its armor drank in the light around it, a dull sheen that made anyone unwilling to look directly. Purple cosmic energy ran through the breastplate like thick ribs, tracing strange, living patterns. The skirt armor at its waist was etched with complex constellations, as if the universe's star map had been condensed into metal. Faint glows pulsed along those patterns, telling silent, ancient tales. Along the skirt's edge, frozen fragments of collapsing planets hung like trapped memories of destruction. Higher up, where a neck should have connected to a head, there was a bottomless darkness, an abyss that could not be penetrated. Above that void, stardust swirled under some unseen pull, forming a vortex. Suspended in that whorl was a head, the dark star demon god, feral and twisted, featureless where eyes should be, its jaws lined with needle-sharp fangs that flashed a cold light. A strange golden mark burned on its forehead, the demon seal of the death-omened star, the emblem of a devourer of worlds. In its right hand, it held a scythe that radiated the aura of death itself, the blade seeming to hunger for life. Its haft trailed an apparently endless chain, born of the void and clinking in time with the being's movements. Above its left palm hung another black hole, a yawning gateway that swallowed surrounding light. "Who are you?" Aurelion asked, and for the first time his voice carried a rare, unmistakable gravity. He had seen countless entities over eons, but the presence before him felt unprecedentedly hostile, an all-consuming force, the very antithesis of what the Celestials defended against. "I am merely a passing envoy of the Taha," the figure replied. The stardust vortex around its head spun faster as it spoke. "Death-omened star?" Aurelion frowned, searching through his vast memory. He had no record of such a thing. "I have never heard of a death-omened star. Are you from beyond the universe?" "It matters not where I come from, God. You only need to know this planet belongs to me." The speaker was Noah, the incarnation of Darkstar Thresh, but not in his true body. Like Aurelion himself, he stood as a shadow projection, a fragmentary avatar. When Noah finished his words, he acted. The demon god raised its left hand. The black hole above the palm opened its maw and unleashed a crushing suction. The force struck like an unseen hand, seizing Arishem and trying to pull him into the bottomless dark. Arishem's 6 eyes flared with inner fire. Cosmic energy surged through his form in a desperate bid to counter the gravity. Golden sigils bloomed across his red-gold body. The energy pulsed, and he tore himself from the black hole's direct grip. But the suction still leached at him. Golden filaments of light were drawn out from the patterns along his armor, pulled into the void and snaking away like thread being reeled in. If he remained solely on the defensive, the cosmic energy of his shadow would be ruthlessly drained. He took the initiative. Arishem clasped his hands and called up a vast tide of power. From his fingertips, countless golden strands rose and braided together, knotted into a focal point between his palms. The cosmic forces churned, and slowly a starlet of brilliant light formed there, radiating heat and glare that filled the warped space. Ajax stood between 2 titanic gods, each as immense as a planet, and the pressure pressed into her like a physical weight. The star in Arishem's hands cast searing light. She felt it scorch her, felt herself begin to sunder under the heat as if her form were melting. Gritting her teeth, she poured her restorative will into mending the damage, whisking her body back together again, even as agony tore through her. The pain was indescribable, but she held on. At the very moment Arishem's star reached its full ferocity, a purple scythe lanced out of the void, sudden, silent, and appeared directly before him without warning. Before the brilliant star in Arishem the judge's hand could fully form, a streak of purple light like lightning tore through the void and appeared directly before him. It was a scythe that exuded the aura of death. Its blade and chains were braided with the spectral power of the death-omened star, sending a cold shiver down the spine. Arishem had only just finished shaping the shining star and had no time to react before the purple scythe struck with full force. Its blade sliced through as if through nothing, piercing the god's body. The chains, alive as venomous serpents, snaked around him with terrifying speed. They were not only impossibly strong, but also charged with the death-omened star's uncanny power, binding Arishem like shackles and rendering him immobile. An unprecedented pressure crushed him. His power felt restrained, unable to manifest fully. He fought to break the bonds, but the death-omen energy held him like iron manacles. He could not fathom why this purple force suppressed him so completely, as if it were inherently anathema to celestial power. In that desperate instant, Arishem had no choice but to release the star in his hand. The dazzling orb detonated into a blinding supernova. The energy within it poured outward like a violent flood, engulfing the surrounding darkness of the universe. The torrent surged toward Darkstar Thresh. Its fluctuations were so intense they warped space itself, threatening to dissolve everything in its path. Ajak, though not directly in the torrent's line, was caught in its catastrophic reach. The supernova's heat would have reduced her to a wisp. As her life seemed to flash before her, a pitch-black sphere bloomed at her side, trailing a purplish-black tether. A tremendous suction radiated from that sphere, and in an instant drew her whole body inward. Dizzy, she tried to follow the tether with her eyes, but the world spun and space twisted. In the next heartbeat, the scorching blaze was gone. She found herself standing behind a colossal purplish-black god. Noah, who faced the supernova head-on, watched the approaching torrent with unhurried calm. Darkstar Thresh only lifted a hand, and the black sphere in his palm opened like a bottomless abyss. Exhaling a gravity so powerful, the raging energy of the supernova bent and flowed toward it. The torrent that had seemed unstoppable now appeared helpless before that void. Held fast by the black hole's pull, it could do nothing but be consumed, piece by piece. Having undone the supernova, Darkstar Thresh let purple energy chains form from his hand and tightened them. The chains coiled around Arishem, constricting until the judge's metallic body began to buckle. A strange force crept into him, devouring the cosmic energy within. Arishem tried once more to break free, but the bonds would not yield. He fell still, his phantom form resigned to an inevitable end. "Messenger of the death-omened star," Arishem said, his voice calm even as the chains crushed him. "Your power should not manifest in this universe. I will return to Earth and pass judgment." Darkstar Thresh chuckled low, fanged maw parting. "Heh, I'll be waiting for you all." He yanked on the chains, dragging Erisham straight in front of him. The black hole in his hand surged forward and pressed against the judge's face like an insatiable void. It swallowed light and energy as if they were nothing. The 6 golden flames burning in Erisham's eye sockets guttered and were extinguished under that consuming gravity. With those lights gone, the Celestial's body began to compress and tear under the black hole's force, each wrenching sound high and terrible. The immense form shrank and folded in on itself until, at last, it vanished entirely into the abyss. Ajak watched in stunned horror. Celestials had always been, to her, absolute and unmatched. Even knowing the Arisham before her was not his true body, she had never imagined witnessing such annihilation. The image of that massive figure being drawn into the black hole seared itself into her mind. Darkstar Thresh, having swallowed the Celestial, exhaled a satisfied sigh, human in its contentment, like someone who had just finished a feast. He turned, and though Ajak could not see eyes on his face, she felt his gaze fix on her. Then the warped universe around them began to dissolve. The environment shifted back into the familiar Earth she had come from. The massive form that had called itself the messenger of the death-omened star slipped away into the same distorted black hole from which it had arrived. "Ajak!" A shout, sharp and familiar, pierced the air and pulled her back from the scene. Startled, she looked up toward the voice. Chapter 359, Back to Reality. The weave of cosmic energy dissolved, and Ajak found herself back on Earth. For a moment she stood there dazed, as if the soul-stirring vision she had just experienced still clung to her. In that other place, a colossal black shadow, demon-like, godlike, had appeared. She didn't know what it was, only that it had felt, strangely, as if it were protecting her. A shout snapped her back to the present. Ajak looked up toward the voice and saw Cersei calling her, frantic. The rest of the Eternals clustered nearby, their faces taut with concern. But something was wrong. She remembered meditating inside the church, yet now she could see the sky. Where were the walls? She swept her gaze around, and the shock hit her. The church was a ruin. It looked as if a violent impact or explosion had shredded it. Debris littered the ground in a chaotic spread. The only place untouched was the chair she had been sitting on, and roughly a 1-meter radius of floor around it. Ajak's pulse quickened. Perhaps the clash between the Celestials and that demon god had leaked outward and detonated the building. If that were true, the damage should have extended beyond the church, to the village, the forest, maybe farther. The thought made her stomach drop. Outside, the other Eternals had been occupied with ordinary things, chatting, enjoying the scenery, filming documentaries, dodging Kingo's camera. Then a massive explosion from the village drew them all in. Makari and Druig, who had been at the lake, were the first to race toward the sound. Druig, as village chief, had to see what had happened. Makari, with her super speed, got them there in an instant. The cosmic energy in Makari's body shielded them from the stresses of superspeed, and Druig's celestial physiology made him sturdier than a human, so both arrived intact. What they found was a scene of ruin. The church lay in tatters, architectural fragments scattered among groaning villagers injured by falling debris. In the center of the wreckage, Ajak sat on a broken chair with her eyes closed, her face pinched, and strange energy still flickering around her. It made the others hesitate to approach. Druig and Makari did what they could for the wounded first. As more of the Eternals gathered, they exchanged baffled looks. No one could explain Ajak's state. She and Phastos were the two who knew most about these matters, and Phastos wasn't here. When Cersei's call finally drew Ajak's eyes open, she blinked and drew a shuddering breath. "I'm so sorry. Something happened just now." She stopped as her gaze climbed toward the sky. Others followed it. A figure was descending slowly above the shattered church. At first, they assumed it must be Ikaris. He was the only Eternal who often flew. But the silhouette resolved into someone else. A flicker of a black hole formed on his left hand, shrinking under everybody's stare until it collapsed into a card. Most of the Eternals watched with suspicion, uncertain who this airborne stranger was and why he'd appeared. Gilgamesh, Tina, and Ajak, however, looked calmer. They recognized him. "Hey, Noah," Gilgamesh called, and the cry cut through the murmur. The rest of the group glanced at Gilgamesh, puzzled that he should know this man. Noah glanced at the Dark Star Thresh card, which had just reverted to its trial card form, then eased down to the ground. After he'd parted ways with Fastos, he'd intended to check on Ajax and look for deviants. But he'd realized he didn't know where the Eternals were, so he'd asked Lysandra to locate them. Lysandra had slipped into Ajax's phone and could track her, but the phone was now out of satellite range. She could only give Noah Ajax's last known signal position, which led him to the edge of the Amazon. As Noah tried to make sense of how to find anyone in the vast rainforest, a new anomaly flagged in the system backpack he wore. Chapter 360, Another Experience Card. Noah arrived at the edge of the Amazon rainforest where Ajax's phone signal had last been detected, following the lead Lysandra had given him. The system backpack's inventory panel registered another anomaly, though he hadn't checked it yet. At the same time, a surge of energy from deep within the forest made him pause. What is that? The sensation was oddly familiar, as if he'd encountered it before, but he couldn't place where. Noah didn't linger on the thought. He opened the system panel and then the backpack. The experience card inside was slamming against the side of the compartment, again and again, and a wave of recognition washed over him. He'd seen this happen recently, when he had been treating Tina's mod Wiry in her memory sea. Back then, Dark Star Thresh had reacted strongly because it had sensed the power of the Celestials. Noah guessed a similar force must be nearby now. The familiar energy he'd felt earlier was likely celestial power. He pulled out the Dark Star Thresh experience card and gripped the trembling card tightly. It immediately stilled in his hand and began to exhale black smoke that curled around his palm. The wisps merged and coalesced into a small black hole. Noah stared at it, confused and curious. The card was demonstrating its strange power again. Black energy seeped from the hole and flowed toward him, spreading over his body. System, this card won't just activate on its own, will it? Noah asked aloud, worried. If an experience card activated without his consent, it could consume its time irreversibly, and he didn't want to waste such a valuable asset. Summoner, rest assured, the experience card's autonomous behavior does not override your will. It will not activate or consume time unless you choose to use it. Its effects take place only when you actively deploy it. Relieved, Noah allowed the energy to engulf him. Everything went black. In the next instant, he had been torn through space and found himself in a void, a pitch-black universe. He looked down and saw he had taken the form of Dark Star Thresh, though only as a shadow copy, not the true being. Standing before him was Aurelion the Judge, also present only as a shadow. The confrontation began. During the clash, Noah managed to shield Ajax, who was struggling to survive in the fissures, keeping her from being wiped out by some unknown area attack. He also noticed something important. The power of Dark Star Thresh seemed to restrain the Celestials. It was a significant revelation. While the Celestials had few appearances in the films, the comics showed they rarely fought one-on-one if they could instead overwhelm an opponent with numbers. Odin himself had once been overwhelmed by them. If Aurelion couldn't defeat Noah, other Celestials would surely join the fight. Knowing that Dark Star's power could hold them back gave Noah new confidence. Even if they came in force, Dark Star Thresh might not be hopeless against them. Aurelion's shadow was swiftly destroyed, and its remnants were devoured by Dark Star Thresh's power. Then, in a flash, Noah was back on Earth, hovering above a small village deep in the Amazon. He scanned the area and realized this had to be the village where Druig had been in the movie. The Dark Star power had receded, and he returned to his human form, though echoes of that power lingered inside him, an impression of immense strength. Noah wondered how much of Dark Star Thresh's true power that shadow form had represented. 1%? 1/10,000th? Even a sliver of such strength had left him impressed. After absorbing Aurelion's energy, the experience card itself had changed. The black hole above his left hand thinned, then reformed into the card. Dark Star Thresh experience card. When he had treated Tina's mod Wiry earlier, the card's duration had increased to 1 hour. Now it had gained an additional 4 hours, 5 hours total, a several-fold increase. Noah felt a surge of daring. Bring on the Celestials, he thought. Noah, someone called from below. He looked down to see ruins and a gathering of Eternals, Ajak and several others. The shattered ruin was likely the result of the previous battle's energy bleeding into Earth's reality. Noah had tried to control the leakage. He knew even a clash between celestial shadows and dark star could have been catastrophic for Earth. Fortunately, only a small amount leaked, and only a few villagers were injured. Gilgamesh, who had been the one to call him, stood among the Eternals. Noah descended slowly and landed near them. "Gilgamesh, Tina, Ajak," he said, nodding in greeting to the Eternals he recognized. Gilgamesh stepped forward. "Friends, this is Noah, the human I told you about." He introduced Noah to the other gathered Eternals, who all greeted him politely. After the introductions, Gilgamesh asked, "By the way, Noah, why are you here? When did you arrive?"